Tom Slater, as always, now on a Tuesday, editor of Spiked Online, joins us for the whole show. Morning to you.
Morning.
What would you give? What would you give? Either Emmanuel Macron or President Trump, because it turns out we are just buttering up foreign leaders. State visit here. Stay in the King's bed. You can go to bed with Camilla. I'm sure they'd offer anything. To be fair, Camilla for Macron, about the right age group.
No, exactly.
Let's be
tight,
honest.
As we can see. No, mind boggles. I'm trying to think of something for even them, because both of them basically like to be treated like princelings. One's just slightly.
I'm going for gilt, for both men.
Yeah.
Gilt-edged, proper, full gold, Trump Palace style gold, or Elysee Palace style gold, full-length mirror.
Oh,
it's what they like the most.
No, exactly.
Both
just leave
men
them
like that
with
the most.
With their favourite company, which is themselves.
Absolutely. Although it have to be a bit of a taller one for Donald Trump. Just a tiny little mirror for Emmanuel Macron.
For Emmanuel, yeah.
Anyway, that continues the sizest element of the show. French President on a state visit to the UK. First question, why the hell are we inviting Emmanuel Macron to this country? What has Emmanuel Macron ever done for us? I mean, he was leading the punishment beating of Britain over... was it a democratic vote for Brexit? I believe it was. He's done everything he can to try and punish us. Threatened to cut the electricity off the Channel Islands over a fishing row. Doesn't do anything to stop the Channel migrant boats. At every possible opportunity has tried to humiliate and scupper every policy that we have tried. What on earth are we doing? Rolling out the red carpet for that little man who, by the way, is going to be out of office in 2 years and is extraordinarily unpopular with his own people. Why?
Oh, it's very unseemly, isn't it? This is purely because Keir Starmer has got it into his head that if he can butter up Emmanuel Macron, the migrant boat crisis will go away, even though that hasn't worked. It hasn't worked a year before. The Tories in the previous government throwing money at Macron's government didn't make the blindest bit of difference. And I guess the hope is that by appealing to the quite kind of princeling, kingly elements of Emmanuel Macron, loves a state visit, loves a red carpet, loves the gilt mirror, whatever size it might be, that this might help get some sort of deal over the line. But I come back to that point you just made there. He's a lame duck president. Yeah. He is being outflanked both to his right and his left in French politics, both sides of which will probably not like what migrant deal he comes to.
Maybe that's why Starmer likes him. Because weirdly, Keir Starmer has got that massive majority, which Macron thought he was going to get with his last election and failed to get, and actually, lost his majority in the French Parliament. But maybe that's what they've got in common, because actually neither of them has any authority or popularity at home.
Exactly. Pro-EU, useless, very unpopular. Weird, wild speculation about their personal life. So
I think this is going to be interesting, actually, because you never see them in the same room at the same time. There is a possibility, although the same person. But this is the thing. They're just... Macron, I think, is good on foreign policy. I think he's been solid on foreign policy. I'll take him on that largely, not the whole way. So we're rolling out the red carpet. What do you make of this? Well, demands on the front page of the Mail today. We've had back our 771 million quid. More than £750 million that we have given to the French to try and stop these boats. Now, there was a point where they were stopping more boats, but then they just started building bigger boats and putting 50 people on them instead of 30. So you had slightly fewer boats, but more people arriving. We've seen that massive increase in the number of boats. Already 20,000. It's well over that now, probably about 23,000 by now, by the end of last week. And we haven't even hit the real, summer season of crossings, the July, August, September months, when they come en masse. He's not done much. They're not even, they slashed one dinghy, but they won't do that regularly. They're putting some drag nets down, all of that. Is doing a deal on returns the only way we're going to deal with this, as in you have to stop the demand? So if people know they're going to go pay, £1.5, £3,000, whatever it is this week to get to the White Cliffs of Dover, that you are just going to be put on a plane or a boat and sent straight back to France. As we understand it, as such as we know the details, this idea of this deal would be for every one migrant who arrives on the Channel dinghies, we can send them back, but we will then take someone who is trying to seek asylum in France who wants to come to Britain, and a lot of them will be queuing up saying, better deal in Britain, you get handed out goodness knows what, as we know, and we will take one of those asylum seekers in return. But as Mike Graham just pointed out, I mean, you could argue, in my view, well, those people claiming asylum and perhaps be already approved for asylum might be a better bet than the young men of military age turning up on our shores illegally. But they're also, these people who claim asylum are likely to be bringing a whole load of dependents, aren't they?
No, absolutely. And I don't think this plan is going to happen for all kinds of different reasons. There's already the EU who are kicking up a stink about this. They really don't like the idea of Britain having any kind of backdoor arrangement with any European country. You deal with all of us or you deal with none of us is the way they approach these things. There's also to the point at which it's politically saleable to the public. I know we don't know a lot of the details so far, but a kind of one in, one out will just sound like moving the problem around. I take the point about the fact that the people we will be taking from France would have passed some kind of process, but that's putting a hell of a lot of faith in France's internal refugee screening processes. We've seen how
presumably be us
ours
screening them as well. I mean,
but it would still be something where you're kind of having to rely on another country, which in some cases might have a friendly administration, in other cases might not. And the fundamental problem with all of this, with the crossings from France to the UK, is that France have always had an incentive to allow those crossings to continue to take place because of the fact that they're no longer their problem. Could we see a similar thing with this scheme where, shall we say, it's there's a willingness to kind of just usher them in the other direction?
I've always thought it's completely against French interest to allow people to leave and come back, because one of the reasons why people are making their way to France when it's actually a very unfriendly, unwelcoming place to what are intents purposes economic migrants, is that actually because they're coming to Britain, if they know they're not going to be able to get to Britain, they probably wouldn't come to France, where it's less hospitable than some of the other countries they could be in. But I mean, I'm all for everything worth a try, but I know for a fact that if Keir Starmer is overseeing this deal, it will be a bad deal for Britain. And if the EU agrees to this deal, it will be a good deal for the EU. We've already had the European Commission speaking up on behalf of Spain and Greece and Italy and other countries saying, so when these people are sent back from Britain to France, where is France going to send them? Because France doesn't want them, isn't going to look after them. They're going to end up back in our countries. We'll go back to those, the old rules. Basically, it's first safe place you can seek asylum. That's where you have to stay. And understandably, those southern Mediterranean countries are going, don't think so, don't really want them either. The whole thing is madness. The whole thing is utter madness. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And do you want your money back? £771 million that hasn't really done anything to solve the problem. I still come back to the fact that Keir Starmer's criticism of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss briefly, and Rishi Sunak was, if only they would just sit down and have proper talks and stop all the refusal to have proper conversations. Even when, Priti Patel was Home Secretary, she wasn't invited to one of the big sort of sit-downs on the migrant issues. They chose not to invite her in France. That tells you something. The problem was on their side. But his view is always, you can just sit down and talk and you can come to a deal. Yeah, it's not working out that well, is it? Funny how these things turn out to be a little bit more complicated than he thought.
No, they really just thought that because they were slightly similar politically and because they were competent people who weren't preoccupied with culture wars and all these cliches they told themselves, that it would all
trans women and women, no culture wars.
But it was like when Donald Trump said he was going to come in and sort all these problems in 24 hours. They actually made it sound as if all of this was incredibly straightforward. Yeah. This stuff is difficult, and it's made even more difficult when you refuse to actually take serious decisions to deal with this problem. Yeah,
exactly. And also when you're basically, as we've seen with Keir Starmer throughout this, from 2016 onwards, you're on the side of the opposition. That's the reality. And when the King today at the state banquet for Emmanuel Macron at Windsor is going to say, we had some of his words released, front page of some of the papers, going to be talking about how we have no borders, no borders between us, and talked about our shared effort to solve complex threats. We do have a border with France. We're different countries with different interests. Can we stop this nonsense?
No, absolutely, and that's come to the fore since we've left the European Union. And that's whoever is governing this country needs to get to grips with the fact that there is such a thing called the national interest. Sometimes you would hope that you can, through diplomacy, it will align, but there's sometimes where you have to clash, where you have to have out your problems. You want to be neighbourly, but at the same time, you can't just put up with whatever is being pushed your way because of the fact that you want to make nice with the European Union.
Exactly.
So at some point, our governing class needs to get over that. We have left the EU. We have certain policies that your voters want to pursue, and you have to pursue them even if it makes you unpopular in a Brussels dinner party.
But it's interesting that Emmanuel Macron is going to be at the State Bank. He's going to be meeting with Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. Obviously, we're meeting with Keir Starmer 2 days bilaterals after all the state and the red carpet and the gold carriages stuff. But he's not going to be meeting with Nigel Farage, the Reform leader, which is really interesting because because actually, you think, oh, well, he's only Politico, the morning email saying, oh, he's only got 4 MPs now. It was 5, but now 4. But the reality is, Keir Starmer's policies are more being dictated by Nigel Farage, in the same way that a lot of what Macron is doing is now being dictated by Le Pen, Marine Le Pen, who won the last parliamentary elections. I mean, this is the reality: is that actually these two men, they think they're so high and mighty and above the populist leaders. Yeah, it's the populist leaders who are driving everything now. There we are. Let's talk about a populist. Norman Tebbit, Lord Tebbit, he has died at the age of 94. Obviously, I mean, a lot of people might know more from, the spitting image puppet. This is Bruiser Biker. He was absolutely right-hand man to Margaret Thatcher in every sense. He was also obviously a high-profile victim of the IRA bombing of Brighton in 1984, and his wife sadly was paralysed the rest of her life in that bombing. He also famous for that phrase, talking about how, party conversation, his father didn't riot when he didn't have a job. He said he got on his bike and he looked for work. He was I'm older than you, so he's more a part of my adult life, but he was an incredibly sort of dominant figure throughout an awful lot of my time, certainly in the 80s, in my time, being aware of politics, just an incredibly dominant figure, and who had incredible influence on the Thatcher government and therefore on the country. No,
absolutely. Certainly one of the Thatcher loyalists for many of those years, serving many different positions in cabinet, and someone who I think became one of the kind of key and sort of seminal figures of that government. He didn't necessarily rise to the high offices of state, but nevertheless was seen very much
made the cabinet again and again.
But nevertheless, very much seen as a kind of central figure. He never quite made that job in the Home Office, but still was someone who was seen as kind of carrying the message. And you can understand why, insofar as whatever you think of the Thatcher government, whatever you think of Norman Tebbit, it clearly
I imagine you weren't a fan.
Well, I wasn't around, but looking at these things, it's interesting what a seminal figure and an interesting figure in the kind of in a chapter of the history of working class Toryism as well. Nicknamed the Chinkford skinhead, coming from kind of working class outer London, and very much with those successive wins, very much kind of won off the back of the kind of southern white van man to a certain extent. You're really seeing that shift in politics, where there was a lot of working class voters who were kind of bristling against what felt like the limits of Labour Party and trade union politics, the closed shop.
Exactly. He was crucial in that, in the trade unions. Well, those powers all being rolled back. I remember saying, he was anyone who'd lived through the winter of 78, 79. I remember it very vividly. School being closed, rubbish in the streets. We'll kind of Thanks, Norman. But an incredible, real giant. When there were giants in politics, there don't seem to be so many anymore. I want to get back to British politics very soon, but I also want to talk about Donald Trump. He's got Netanyahu on a state visit, the Israeli Prime Minister currently. Netanyahu surprised Donald Trump with a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. Lots of talk about he's trying to bring peace in the Middle East, Ukraine. And again, for me, it depends on what terms. But I was absolutely stunned by people saying, oh, this is outrageous. President Obama was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He won the election in 2008, got into office in 2009. Only 11 days into after his inauguration did the nominations close for the Peace Prize in 2009. And yet he was nominated and won the Peace Prize. He was nominated when he'd literally done nothing. Absolutely, literally nothing. And yet so many people were saying, oh, how wonderful this was that he had been nominated. He was nominated, apparently, the Norwegian Nobel Committee cited his efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples, particularly his work towards a world free of nuclear weapons. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? Netanyahu and Trump have done more to rid the world of nuclear weapons in recent months.
You're starting to get the impression that when it comes to the Nobel Peace Prize, people are just thinking it is almost indistinguishable from the Oscars or something.
Didn't Greta partly win one at some point?
Surprise me. It's just it's done on the basis of vibes. Even if Trump manages to, through his slightly unconventional or brash tactics, actually bring some modicum of peace either to Eastern Europe or to the Middle East, almost people wouldn't accept it because he didn't do it in the kind of glossy, warm feeling kind of way that they would associate with this kind of stuff. So it would be, it's a great move by Netanyahu, not least because he's in the process of trying to butter up Donald Trump in the same way we're trying to butter up Emmanuel Macron at this point. It's one of those things where they wouldn't give it to him even if he did pull off the impossible in terms of these two conflicts. I think we all know why.
Yeah, indeed. I also just want to run by you. There's a new report from the Office for Budget Responsibility. We know they're the ones who oversee, fiscal finances. They've been talking about where are, particularly the welfare bill and public sector debt and all of this. They are basically forecasting that we're going to be in a lot of trouble. They're trying to say it in a very subtle way, but basically we are in an awful lot of trouble. They're saying UK's public finances are in a relatively vulnerable position with limited recent success in putting them on a more sustainable footing. I mean, tell us something we don't know on that front. The triple lock is currently treble what it was initially assumed to cost, this sort of triple lock for pensions, when it was introduced back in 2012, so more than £15 billion a year. The state pension is on course to cost 7.5% of the UK's entire GDP within 50 years. In the 1950s, it was just 2%. That's a huge. Basically, debt is on track to hit 270%, so almost 4 times GDP, like the country's output by 2070. And the abandoning of planned spending reductions on welfare and things like that has substantially eroded the UK's capacity to respond to shocks. We are facing one hell of a budget this autumn in terms of tax rising and spending cuts. But there's no evidence whatsoever that this government, either Rachel Reeves in her tears or Keir Starmer in his total and utter failure to understand any of this stuff, is willing to take the bull by the horns and say we're going to have to cut a load of key spending. You can't. Cutting MPs' expenses isn't going to make a difference, guys. It's a drop in the ocean. We're talking about many tens of billions going on welfare. They're just not willing to do it because the backbenchers won't let them. They're not willing to be unpopular, but they're not willing to do the stuff that's necessary. This problem, by the way, also created by the Tories, obviously. Let's not pretend it hasn't been. But we are in a whole heap of trouble.
No, absolutely. I mean, listening to those quotes from the OBR, they sound a bit more anodyne than they actually are. I mean, this is just the red warning lights flashing very...
This is whoop, this is that red... that's September the 7th, 3 o'clock. This is the whoop, whoop, whoop.
And of course...
The economy is up the spout.
The OBR very rarely get the predictions right, but you look at anywhere across the board at the moment, any kind of report, all the indicators suggesting... I mean, we could genuinely be on the verge of a serious sovereign debt crisis if a few things don't go our way. We've seen how fragile the economy is. We've seen how jittery the markets are, not just in relation to the whole Liz Truss blow up a few years ago, but also, gilt yields have been, soaring recently. And
more higher than they were under Liz Truss.
And we're already paying, about 100 billion a year just servicing the debt that we already have. I mean, this... Not
paying off the mortgage.
Exactly.
We're just paying
it's just going on, it's just disappearing. And you think at some point you're going to have a government that is willing to engage in the kind of proper structural reforms that would get us over
and
get
the public.
Us out of this,
voters are going to have to begin to understand. I've been saying this for years. We get the governments we deserve, and if we insist on making them lie to us, saying you can have this, you can have that, or free school meals, free this, free that, welfare here, state pension protected, benefits for everybody. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, let's defend the country. If you want that, that's great. But you're going to have to pay for it. And a few billionaires over there aren't going to have enough money to pay for it all. Simple as that.
You can understand the exhaustion because of the fact that after 2008 we had the government coming in, the original coalition, and then the Tory party, who were saying, there is going to be some bitter medicine, but there will be brighter days ahead. We ended up with a decade of, lost economic growth, effectively. So people are bristling more at the idea that they're going to have to put up with this. But it's also about politicians who are willing to make a longer-term argument, put out a vision to say there are things that we're going to have to do, which will be disruptive, which might hurt in the short term.
We need the Argentinian president.
But this is where we're aiming for. I think voters are grown up enough to listen to that kind of message. There's just politicians refusing.
He's slashed inflation. His growth is off the scale. He's basically said, we're going to have to massively cut spending. Everyone assumed, he'll get in, but then people will bristle. No, supremely popular because he's doing what he said he was going to do, and everyone knew it was necessary. We need a melee. Is Nigel Farage on melee? I'd love to know your thoughts. But also I want to hear from you about Keir Starmer. He's hoping to agree this one-in, one-out Channel migrant deal with President Emmanuel Macron, his state visit. He's arriving today. He's got a speech in Parliament at 4 o'clock, state banquet at Windsor Castle tonight. I'd love to know, should he be having a state visit? What do you think about that?